Good morning. My name is Harvey Farrell, and I'm one of the HRBAs that support Connect Carolina. And with me is Alex Smith, also a BA that supports our team, support you guys. And today's presentation is Student Originators Best Practices. And so what that means is we're not actually doing a training course on all the ePAR transactions, but actually the things that we find might be helpful for you when you're actually doing your work. And so with that, we'll just sort of cover through that. Sorry, I need this, don't I? A little about the agenda. We're going to cover position overview, some pre-hire steps, the hire ePAR, job change, short work break, things with expected end dates, terminations, additional information, maximizing ePAR search, and hopefully we'll have room at the end for questions. And as I go forward, I will certainly feel free to take any questions you have, and I'll try my best to answer it, or Alex will answer it. If not, we'll write it down and we'll shoot it to you in a mail some kind of way. All right? So as we go forward, position overview. First of all, what is a position? Can someone tell me what is a position?
The holding place for the person who's going to be doing the job that identifies them.
Excellent answer. A holding place for a person doing a job. And the reason you create positions, obviously, is the next person that takes that very same job would inherit the attributes of that job. So hours, department, who the position might report to. So all those things are why you have positions. It just makes your work a lot easier and faster in the hiring process when you assign a position to an individual. So some of the things that we want to talk about here are departments are responsible for creating the position, which you know. Who needs a position? All SHRA students need a position. It's important for Tim, certainly, to actually clock time against the position. It determines the pay rate for that. So it's important that we have one student per position. If a student has more than one job, then certainly that person would need more than one position. EHRA students typically, well, actually it's up to the department as to whether a position actually needed for that role or not. So it's sort of an optional thing, but based on departmental rules that you might have. Once created, positions may be reused, as I mentioned before. So when a person leaves a position or you're hiring into that position, you can certainly reuse that position. And this is just a little bit, as you see on the screen here, the ePAR form, and we just give some guidance for how you fill the form out. Always, top to bottom, left to right when completing the form. Do not complete the form out of order, because a lot of the attributes open other fields on the form or actually pre-filled data going below that it may have read in from its source, all right? A tip on effective dates. If you're used to doing job actions or job actions, you can have more than one action on an effective date. When position data, you can't. So position data, we only have, the way PeopleSoft is structured, there's an effective date, one action per date on the position. If you have a change to that effective date, then often you'd actually have to send that into the help desk to actually get that addressed by our team. Some information defaults in from falls in from the job code, like the FTE, so you want to make sure that's accurate, make sure the hours are agreed to what you need on the position. When you create a position, the default action is new. Changes to positions are often done by the complex originators. So if you have to alter a position in some kind of way, you can't do it as student originators. You can create positions, but you can't actually alter the position. So you need help from your HR staff to support that. Overallocation, and this slide, I'll just sort of bring out some of the things here on the slide up front. Overallocation, because we can only have one person per position, and so the position, we actually have audit reports that actually tell us when there's more than one person assigned to a position. It causes issues with Tim, as I mentioned before, because obviously pay is tied, or hourly rate is tied to the position, so you can't have two persons actually booking time against that same position. You can reuse a position, however, provided the position is vacant. In other words, you transferred the person out, the person terminated, you can reuse that same position number. And it's always best to check to see if the position is available before you actually use that position. And certainly InfoPort can help you look to see the status of a position. Yes?
I love to read positions,
Mm-hmm.
and I do all of those checks.
Mm-hmm.
But as a student originator, you just mentioned, I can't change things like the, especially the supervisor.
Right.
But when I always check to make sure, verify that that's a vacant position. But it doesn't tell me who the supervisor and the team manager are at curriculum. So until I get into, moving that position forward, I don't know. Oftentimes, then I have to have the HR person, the HR supervisor. Then they need to change that information. But if I could get that information when I'm looking up the position, that would be really helpful. And
on the vacant
yes,
report, you would like to have supervisor report.
yes. Because then I can say, well, Mary is hiring somebody. I'll find a position number that is the right FTE, so on Mary, rather than picking Perla. And that's happened too.
The only thing I can think of, Alex is making some notes there, and we'll take that back. Certainly, we can help with modifying the reports to make them more helpful. I'm just not sure if the TIM information is actually attached to the position or actually attached to the person. That's the only thing I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The TIM manager is a fillable thing for me.
Yes.
Not the supervisor.
Exactly.
So I have to keep a separate list of all the supervisors that then need to be changed and hand that off to somebody else. And then they need to make all those changes. But if I knew up front who the supervisor assigned to that position number was, then I could better select.
Thank you. Yes, please.
In our department, when we create positions, we don't add it to any, when we're creating a position, just so that it's kind of like a blank canvas, and what you really need is just the FTE to match, so that when you are reusing them, you don't have to get another change there, change it in the create position, so that it feeds forward into the higher.
So there isn't a.
So, right. Well, I'll talk a little bit about that actually on this slide. The difference between reports to and supervisor. So normally in true position management, everyone has a position. The employee would have a position. The supervisor would have a position. And so a person would report to that position. That's the reports to number, which is the position of the supervisor. And that actually would be on the position form. Some departments, however, don't do that necessarily, and they're always reporting the individual to the supervisor, typically at the position. Certain managers do not have positions. So the EHRA permanent staff may not have a position, in which case you'd have that person reporting to that supervisor's ID. In that case, when you build a position, the position is built blank without a position number. And when you do the hire process or the transfer process, you actually key in the supervisor. But it really is depending on how your department is utilizing position management for all of its staff or only some of its staff. Students have to have a position, but their boss may or may not have a position. And that you'll find that difference in the group. Exactly. So, yeah. So it varies between how the departments are managing that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we see all that. We see departments that are actually split. Half the EHRA may have position that the faculty or the administrative sides do, but maybe sometimes the teaching or the professors do not, of course. And so you have various arrangements that come forward like that. All right. So that's sort of what this slide was sort of speaking to. Reports to reside in a position really is a position number of the manager. Supervisor, as I mentioned before, is simply the PID of the manager, and that's put in at the point of hire or the point of transfer. All right. And I've sort of covered all those. When to use switch, it sort of talks about an example: Sally student supervised by Billy Joel. If Billy Joel has a position, then the reports to would actually be used on the position of the student. If not, at the point of hire, you actually use the supervisor ID or the PID of of the manager at the point of hire. Okay. Oh, okay. Now this slide deck has some scenarios in it, so I'll have to sort of read through those myself. And this is sort of a audience participation section. All right. Create a new position with effective date 10/25, but I just found out the employee started working on October the 22nd. What should you do? Oh, well, she saw the slide beforehand. The option one, obviously put in a help ticket. You could, which is not the correct way. Obviously, you could create a new position and sort of put it through that way, but that just sort of clutters up our system with positions that are just sort of sitting vacant. They get abandoned, and we have to actually clean those up. So yeah, the option would be to call the help desk, and particularly obviously having hired the person, and then that ticket would go to the help desk. The help desk ticket would come to Alex, myself, or one of my colleagues, and then we'd go in and backdate that position to allow you to then do the hire on the date the person actually started. All right. Another one we just found out. Yo, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Is there a common practice to create a position or if you complete the I-9? The opposite way. We have the student comes in, we complete the I-9, and we use that effective date to then create the position so that everything matches.
All that works well, and there's just a couple advantages to actually creating the position a little earlier, with the date earlier than the hire. As I mentioned before, you can only have one row with this effective date for that position. So if the person's starting in this case on the 22nd, if you create the position October 21st, and you put the position in on 21st, and you hire the person on 22nd, you realize, oh man, that should have been something else on that position. Your complex administrator can actually submit a change to that position on the 22nd and have the data flow right to the employee. Otherwise, you're going to have to call the help desk, and we're going to have to fix it. So, but to your point, there's nothing wrong with what you just did. So.
It's just that it's kind of like the way I see it, it's like prevention. So you hire the student,
Mm-hmm.
keep their I-9 certificate, has an effective date.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that you use to create the position. Because when you think about it, you create a position before just so you can flow through the process of approval. But if there's a mistake, then you're waiting for someone to help this, and you have to go through the extra step.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, what works for your department, it sounds like it works just fine. Like I said, the only issue is if there is a change to that position, you still have to call the help desk to get that changed on that exact date. So, but there's nothing wrong with what you just said. I think that works fine. You have all the information in front of you. You've got the student in front of you. You know the student's going to start because you're filling out the I-9 with them right there. So, there's certainly nothing wrong with that process. All right. Another example, we found out with an SHRA student who started working 2 weeks ago. Now, that never happens at this company. Absolutely never have a situation where you actually found out you have somebody working in the department. What should you do? Obviously, you immediately start the I-9 process. You need that done and put a case note. And we got some I-9 expertise back here. I know I'm not going to talk about I-9 and might embarrass myself up here, but immediately start the I-9 process and add case note to LawLogix, create the position, or find an vacant position, hire the person, and of course do your historical edits and TIM so the person will get paid. And of course we also, and I think that's coming over my slide a little bit, but you have to submit a ticket to the help desk, and we probably need to do a pay exception sheet to get it into payroll so they actually can pick up those hours and pay that person. So that's the type of things we'd want to do if you actually had a scenario like that. We never ever see that though. Hires and transfers. First thing we'll go through just a few slides about where you find information about students, or you should look up before you actually perform a hire. Obviously, this is the work center, and of course we got the UNC employee information screen, and that's sort of all the details it gives you about a person here, or active or inactive. Basically, all their jobs that they have will be presented on a screen like this. And so the important piece I'll call about here is certainly the expected job end date on a student. Because say if the job is ending, as in this case, I can't quite see that, was 1/1/2018, and you're going to hire a student on the exact same day, you might would converse with the current department to find out if they're going to extend the person or not, opportunity for a transfer as opposed to, creating a new hire for this individual. So you should look this information up before you actually do a hire. See if the person's already a student. Yes.
A higher date? Or how would that benefit us?
I was just looking at somebody yesterday, and I saw that they had another job. Been getting this pay, and this is extra, so you might have seen a little. That's the extra $100 a month.
Oh,
Okay, let me definitely take that back.
The other thing is, if someone has an unpaid affiliation with the department, they work for the Frankfurt Financial Development.
Okay.
And a lot of our EHR have little, they cover but it may not be a paid position that shows up there as active. But if it's not a paid position, they're not currently payroll. So I have to check, and this happened just yesterday. The primary appointment was one of those unpaid affiliations, shows up active here, but I didn't know if the person needed an I-9.
right. Okay.
And so I had to call the I-9 office, and if it just had something to say if this was on payroll or not on payroll, I could have answered that question myself without that.
I don't, Alex, do you know if pay status is impacted by that scenario? I mean, because we got some attributes up here that I would have to investigate to see if that actually is a clear indicator or not.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so, okay.
Do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, so I'll let Daryl chime in as well, but HR status, if one of those statuses is active, then you don't need to do an I-9. The HR status is what matters. So in this instance, if the Keenan Flagler payroll status is inactive, public policy would not need to do a new I-9 because the job indicator primary would say that I-9 would be covered. I still
I've run
like
into
what you
cases.
asked for with the start date.
Yeah, but I've run into cases where there's been a termination in progress, so then I look at that.
There's no accounting for that, right, where things are in flight, that's a known issue. We do have audit reports that try to catch those kinds of things, and obviously the I-9 would be looking at that as well when the break service is created. So, I mean, there's nothing that you could do about that.
I think that most of the confusion comes with the I-9 issue is that, and I'm new, I just transferred to this position, but I've noticed for looking at history of before me, I've noticed that all the departments, like they hire a student and then they figure out that the student has never been terminated. They don't look at the screens like if there's a way that somewhere it can say or trigger the person, because what happens with one of my students and what we caught it in time was that another department realized this person was still on payroll and active, and then they went in and processed instead of a transfer termination, and then I can put it like backdated.
Right.
So when the next department hired that person, then invalidated their I-9. So is there a way that that screen can have an indicator this person has active? It's just a way that we can flag the department that's going to process when the student has 2 appointments and they have to backdate, don't backdate. But someone they can say this student has an active or valid I-9, because if you do that, then it will invalidate, and then you get that call from somewhere in that screen that can say active I-9 effective. I'm not sure.
Well, again, the scenario you're talking about where you hired someone and then all of a sudden this other hourly job that they didn't get termed from last spring, right, when the school year ended, oh, well, they haven't actually been working over the summer, and then they backdate the termination.
Right.
Right. So again, there will be no way to find that at the point when you're hiring them. The best practice that we tell people, if you have a scenario, is please don't backdate your termination. There's no impact on pay. There's no reason to backdate a termination for those exact reasons, especially because there may be other jobs and other departments where that would be impacted. So that to me is the answer: is please don't backdate your termination.
Since you say that, then my mind takes me to say, when you're actually going to process the termination, is there a way that you can put a prompt when the person, before you, like a check, did you make sure this person is not active at another department before you process the termination? Something that can tell the person, before you do this, did you check that they're not active at another place? It's got to be a way that we can alert the person or flag the person before you.
That sounds more reasonable at the point you're doing a status change. Yeah.
Termination logic, potentially. Sure.
Okay.
The only complex users have multiple job summary to like tab that seems to have start date, compensation, it's all.
Yes, because that's job data, so you would have to be a complex user. It's true.
Let me carry on for a good discussion. And in fact, I mean, that's one thing I do appreciate about this particular session, is that everybody actually sharing their ideas and their experiences. And certainly me just spouting off stuff up here, you may pick up a few things, but the real world experience of what your departments and colleagues are doing actually I think is invaluable. So, all right. Just a couple things on the pre-hire step. Postings, not required obviously for UNC students, but obviously any non-student hires that has to be a posting. Background checks needed. Really it's about protecting the people. So obviously if you're a resident advisor, you work with minors, background checks are certainly needed for those types of roles. And students or persons that are enrolled not at UNC, obviously you need to refer to the background check policy to make sure we got all of our things covered with regard to that. The next couple slides deal with I-9, but I think we sort of covered a lot of the I-9 questions here. When is it necessary? Obviously, all employed persons need to have an I-9 to be completed. Section 1, on or before the date of hire. Section 2, within 3 business days of hire. And I think the last section about PID creation for minors, I don't think because they can sign an I-9, I think there's certainly a form you need to fill out as it pertains to persons that are under the age of 18. Any questions about that? Let me quickly get off this slide before you ask it. No. Hire ePAR, some terminology. A hire, obviously a brand new hire, person never been hired before. A rehire, obviously coming into a job that was terminated. Secondary appointments are when you hire into a job and you already have another job active, that's a secondary appointment. And of course, transfer, moving a person from one active appointment to another active appointment. Some notes here they put in the bottom here: weekends are not considered breaks in service. So obviously we don't want to terminate a person on Friday just to have him start a job on Monday. That person should be transferred to avoid that termination. Receiving department's responsible, obviously, for making sure that there's a good handoff on that transfer. Certainly call that department. Are you extending them, not extending them? To make sure we actually are doing that correctly. I think that's it for that. A little bit about the hire process, and I'll put these up. When you go to hire an employee, there's that search screen that comes up where you can type in the PID to look up, the name to look up, different attributes to look up. Well, obviously, John Smith, there's one or more of them at this university. You certainly want to search by PID to look the person up. If you do a name search, this little box here, the little icon with the eyes information, you can actually tab over that and it'll actually show you the details about that row. So if you do happen to pull up 2 John Smiths, look the box, make sure you got the right John Smith that you're talking about. Make sure this is the individual that we're talking about. And that shows up for all the HR information about the person you intended to hire, all right? So in this case, we put in the PID, the same employee came up 4 times because he's got 3 active appointments and 1 inactive appointment. And so you would select, because we want to search by PID. Once again, a little bit of reminder about filling out the form, always top to bottom. There's a little edit existing job box at the bottom. Normally you check that when you're trying to do a transfer to, from one appointment to another appointment, but please fill it out top to bottom. Do not check that box first because you'll pull in attributes that you really don't want to pull in that way. So, and that's just the last thing. And once you check that box, of course, it comes up with the job. Make sure you're selecting the right job to transfer them out of. Effective dates. Oh yeah, just some techniques for choosing the effective date. Obviously, you want to use effective dates that sort of match up with the semester if you can. Associated with that. After your hire is executed, I think it says call the help desk if you've still got issues with that sort of. Like, so we get all kinds of tickets.
There's a common mistake that people will make. They'll put in a hire and they realize that the hire date needs to be moved, right? And they put in a job change ePAR with the change in effective date. And they come to the action reasons and they think, oh, I can't figure that out. But especially with student originators, where in my opinion the online computer training is a little bit lacking. That will never change the hire date. The only way that you can change the effective date of a hire is putting in a help ticket and getting one of the to fix that. There's no way to fix that, the actual effective date of a hire, without putting in a help ticket. That's the thing.
For EHRA students, the FTE defaults in a 0, so you want to make sure you get the right hours and FTE set up on the student when you set them up. And of course, the way we do compensation, SHR students are hourly, EHRA students have a monthly flat rate. A little bit about the payroll calendar. I think you go to that site, you'll find the payroll calendar. It's important to make sure we get the transactions in time to make the payroll. You don't want to get caught by lockout and have to do manual checks to get people paid. You want to be very timely by knowing your department obligations as to which date you need to have your transaction submitted, and give ample time for them to get the approvals done so that we make it in time for payroll lockout. Like I said, there's the monthly schedules out there. You can also have a calendar put into your Outlook so you can be reminded of that. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Up and all over the place, so who knows. The Stipend Calculator for EHRA students. The points in yellow is a spreadsheet that you can actually put in and actually tell you what the flat rate is based on the amount and the start date for the job. Okay, we got some scenarios again. Let's see how these work out. You've submitted a higher ePAR, which has executed, and then you find out the student started earlier than the appointment effective date. As the EHRA student, what do you do? Anybody? Yeah, help desk ticket. Yep, to recalculate the compensation, obviously you have to do a edit existing job, ePAR, to actually get that transaction with the right salary amount stored in PeopleSoft. Certainly you have to open a help desk ticket with a payroll exception sheet. Our team might actually get involved before we forward that on to payroll. We usually do a calculation behind your calculation to make sure that all the numbers look reasonable before we send it to payroll. Yes. Right. And we accept that a lot. I mean, so the payroll exception sheet, there is a form that you fill out and say, this is what really happened here, and this is the details of what it should be. And that's just sort of paper documentation that the payroll department keeps up with. But yeah, if you're just writing a note, it still works because we get that, and we usually write a little commentary behind it too as well, behind what you write, and actually send it on to payroll to make sure it takes place. Question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm not looking at time. We got all day here. Yes.
I run into this a lot because I'm at the Carolina Union and we have 170 student workers. Is there a way that somewhere, a lot of people do not want to calculate the FTE. So you're not supposed to go over 1.0 and the person does not want to calculate the FTE with the actual hours. And then they just put a really high FTE, and then you have to call that department. Hey, can you lower your FTE so I can
hire you? Yeah.
Is there a way that instead of just entering 0.5 or whatever, that you have to make it so that you can select once you leave the rest for another department to use, like an enhancer somewhere, feature, because people do not want to calculate those.
I'm not entirely sure what the
When you're
question
doing a
is.
hire and you have to put their FTE, because the system wants to prevent it for 1.0.
Okay, so will be a hard stop to
Mhm.
SHRs.
So let's say that has multiple points. So including a one that is fixed. So typically, instead of just saying 0.15 or, okay, this one is gonna work 10 hours, so it's point, whatever. They just put a really high FTE, and so let's say it works for 3 departments, like one will have 0.35, the other one, but in real life, that's not the case. Hours, and you have to be calling another department.
Right.
Can you, because you have 3, so you look at the one that has the high FTE, and you have, okay, you lower your FTE so I can hire my person. Does that make sense? So is there a way that we can make it when we hire students, that instead of just putting manually adding the number, that it shows like the ranges of the FTE, you can select, log it in.
I'm not sure how that would be different. I mean, I understand the frustration of dealing with what we're not accurately reporting yet. There's not really a good way for you to, when you're trying to do an entire system, adjust somebody else.
Because when you speak with the student, but when you say how many hours do you work, I only work 10 hours, but they have an department adding that FTE number that will prevent you to get another job.
Yeah.
Because it's just,
Right now, that the only process is applying. I'm not really asking them to. Do you have a question?
There used to be a chart that told the number of hours. So I don't know if that was a contract in the university.
I
So
believe,
maybe someone could come up with a chart to put somewhere with FTE, what
Mm.
hours.
I believe that on the hire form, it shows both. It'll ask you for the MT, but it will show you what it's on the hire form. So it does display that. People may not be paying attention. And I understand the frustration for that.
Department with our HR institutions, we have a standard for like our MSWs, they're all at, 0.25. And our PhD students are all at 0.5. And then if they have other appointments or additional appointments, that's how much space they buy before they hit that 75% threshold, which triggers, something else having to do with health insurance.
Right.
But all of ours that are EHRA, they're on health insurance anyway. All of them. We don't have to, worry about that.
Right. I think the main takeaway is to try, as you're creating positions and hires, is to accurately report the FTE. And I understand that isn't always the case, but right now, the only process to fix that is to check in with the other department and have them fix it if it's wrong.
Okay, I'm gonna skip through the next 2 scenarios just so Alex can actually stand up here. Those are just more scenarios, I think, before we got to Alex. All right,
Okay.
now the fun hour starts.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about adjusting people that you've already got hired. You've already done all the right things because you followed Harvey's steps. We're going to talk about edit existing job or job change. You'll hear those terms used interchangeably. Job change is the underlying form, the ePAR form, that name within Connect Carolina. But the link that you click on when you get to the ePAR homepage is edit existing job. Right, so the kinds of things be pay rate changes, TIM approvers, supervisor ID, all of these various things that you might need to update for an existing job. We would use an edit existing job. Some things to know about those action and reason codes. On the last page, when you get through your edit existing job, Connect Carolina tries to anticipate and fill in some of that stuff for you, right? It tries to be smart. The important thing to keep in mind is the system doesn't always get it right. Imagine that, computers not knowing everything. That's coming soon. So you always want to make sure you review your action and reason codes to make sure that they match up, right, before you actually submit that. You may need to add something, you might need to delete a row that's there or change something that's there. right? So some common action and reason codes that are actually really important to get right. For EHRA students, when we're dealing with extending appointments, if you're just reappointing someone for a semester, they worked last spring and now they're going to come back for the fall, that action and reason code would be job change reappointment, right? We're extending that appointment for a new semester, a new period of time. If you're just changing it by a day or two, right? We had put it in, they were supposed to term on the 17th, but actually we need to pay them through the 19th. Well, that's just a data change and an expected end date change. That's not a reappointment if you're just changing it by a couple of days, right? The reason that we're kind of like highlighting some of these have impact as it relates to reporting, the way that we report efforting. Returning from short work break. This is one that should have some yellow highlighter on it, right? Return from short work break and EHRA reappointment. If you choose that first one, return from work break, EHRA reappointment is the only option. But the important thing to remember is if you've got a student on short work break and you don't add that, they're not going to be back in active payroll status and they're not going to get paid, which for most students is a problem. SHRA students, when you're changing their expected end date, we're just going to use a data change and an expected end date, right? We're extending them to work through the summer, or they're going to work for another month or two, right? So that one's pretty straightforward and doesn't usually have impact with pay. Short work break, just a reminder about what that is intended to be used for, right? That's usually for EHRA students that have a monthly stipend. It's now the end of the spring semester and we're not going to keep paying them over the summer. So we put them on short work break. It keeps their HR status as active, so they keep their active I-9, but they're inactive payroll status. So it doesn't matter what the compensation or anything is on that job record, they're not going to get paid when they're in short work break. Right? So it's intended to cover a semester break, or maybe they're not going to be a student teacher this fall, but they probably will be in the spring, right? So we're going to put them on short work break for the fall. That's going to be an edit existing job, ePAR. You'll want to update the FTE, as we just mentioned, right? You don't want to show a bunch of FTE on someone who's not actually working that job, because maybe over the summer they're going to have an hourly rate, an hourly job, or they're going to do something else. So you do want to update the FTE and the expected end date to give yourself enough wiggle room when they come back, whatever that semester is, to either reappoint them or put the termination in at that point. But there's no reason really, again, to adjust funding when you put someone on short work break or compensation, because they're not going to get paid, right? You're going to look at that whenever you reappoint them and bring them back. And the reaction and reason code that matches up with that is, of course, short work break, EHRA short work break. Returning them then when you get on the other side and okay, now we're going to hire this person back into the same job. That's again an edit existing job, ePAR. We're going to update the FTE again. That might have shifted. They're going to work more or less hours. Change that expected end date again, obviously, to cover the date range, whatever that's going to be for the whole school year or just for that semester. And then you always want to make sure that you review compensation when you return from someone from short work break. Don't assume that it was right beforehand. So you do not want to, in this case, check that checkbox that says, I don't want to update compensation and funding, right? The job change, reappointment, and hire transfer, again, will not change that payroll status. So as I mentioned before, the only way that you can, sorry, that's a little covered up by our recording. That will not be there if you need to review this later. So example, this person was doing a TA in biology. Now they're moving over to physics. It's the same kind of job and I do a hire transfer. But if they were on short work break, they're not going to be back in active payroll status, right? You have to do an edit existing job and do that return from short work break action and reason code that we just mentioned. So if you're moving someone from a department into a new department and they're on short work break, that's going to be a two-step process in order to bring them back. You'll have to either bring them back to active status first and then do the transfer, or do the transfer first and then bring them back to active status. That's a common mistake. And logically, it seems like, well, if I'm doing a transfer, I really want to get them paid again. But it's important system-wise that doesn't exactly work. So this is an example. We've gone through all of the edit existing job and we get to our last page here. And this is what Carolina would try to populate for me, right? We know that in this action, we're increasing his pay, the supervisor's changed, and we changed the expected end date. So the computer system sees, oh, the supervisor was changed, That's something that it could fill in. It knows that pay was updated, but it doesn't know why. And then there were some other changes, that another data change, right? So this shows what we would update that to, right? We want to make sure that we're accurately reflecting whatever those actions and reason codes are, and using those little plus and minus buttons over there at the right if we needed to remove a row or add a new row to accurately reflect what's happening on this form. Just like all of our other things, you want to make sure that you, this is kind of just repeating what I just said, make sure that you add or remove as you needed, and always make sure that you do these left to right, right? So when you've got a job change reappointment that showed up here and you realize, oh, actually, it should be, if you change what's on the left-hand side, it doesn't automatically update what's available on the right-hand side. If you ever see that action reason with no description that's blank, that means you've got an invalid combination, right? So that should be a red flag to you. If you ever see that, that means you've adjusted something out of order, and that's going to get stuck. Those will not write through. Those will get stuck at the IB, and you'll get that "I am working on this" written on the comments of your ePAR, and you think, oh no, what have I done? Just as an FYI, that's just the parlance that the business analysts use to denote that I'm taking a look at it, right? Because we have a number of different people that monitor that queue. But it does also mean that's the person that you could reach out to if you had a question or saying, I really want to get this in before lockout. If Harvey's name's on it, that's the person that you would want to call. But yeah, anytime you get those invalid mismatches, if you don't work them left and then choose the reason code that goes with it, you can get a problem that will force your ePAR to not execute. So I want to work those left to right. Here's a quick scenario. EHRA student who needs to have their job code updated. What form would you use? Well, since we're on edit existing job, if you were guessing that, you were right. Now, edit existing job can update job codes, but this is another one of those tricky scenarios why we're bringing it up today, is that if you're changing someone from a grad student position where they're would be eligible with Grad Star, where they need to be in that system, and you're changing them from a grad assistant to a grad research assistant. So a grad research assistant would be something that would show up in Grad Star and has benefits and information that's related to that. If you just use an edit existing job ePAR to change that, from the system perspective, that's right, but it's not going to get picked up by Grad Star by changing the job code only with an edit existing job. Important to keep that in mind. The only way that that will get picked up is with a hire transfer. So in most cases, changing the job code is fine with edit existing job. That's just a scenario where it won't help you. Another scenario, you get a request from a supervisor that employee was hired in the wrong department. How would you fix that? If you're guessing edit existing job, in this case, that is incorrect. Right? So for an SHRA student, if they're in the wrong department, we're going to change their position, right? We're going to edit their position and move the position into a new department. And that will then write over to their job data to update their department number for SHRA students, because positions are tied to a particular department. For EHRA students, there's no way to edit the existing job and change the department. You have to do that with a hire transfer. So the student that you have where we've created a new position number, a new department number, maybe this July 1st, and they need to transfer them over, that's got to be done with a hire transfer. There's no way to update the department number for an EHRA student with the edit existing job. Here, a wonderful scenario. How timely. You want to hire an SHRA student, but you get the warning that the FTE is greater than 1. What would you do? So that's the scenario that we've already talked about, right? You've got to reach out to that department, find out if the FTE is accurate, and if not, if they can please adjust it so that you can get the hire date. Important to communicate also what hire date you want to use that for, right? If you're trying to backdate your hire a week, you want to make sure you communicate that to them, that the FTE change that they put in has got to go back to match up with the hire date that you're looking for. Let's talk a little bit about this other fun topic, the expected end dates and managing terminations, right? The expected end date, it's a little bit different in PeopleSoft and Connect Carolina than it was in the legacy system, if anybody's been around long enough before we were using Connect Carolina in 2014, right? The expected end date, it's better to think of it as
the day when you would need to do something with this student. So it's not their last day worked. The last day worked is the day before that. If expected end dates and terminations go in and they are effective at midnight of whatever date you choose, right? So at 12:01, if you put in a termination, that person is no longer active for that day. That's the way to think about it, right? So the expected end date should be really, when is the first day I'm going to have to decide, am I going to extend this appointment or am I going to have to put in that termination, right? So it's the day after their last day at work, right? So for example, a grad student hired just for the fall semester. Any guesses on the expected end date for that? 1/1, right, exactly. A grad student hired for the full year. That's probably going to be whatever that is, last day of classes in May. I don't think that's accurate. I think I used this from last year. So whatever the last day of classes would be for this year. An undergraduate student hired just for the month of October. Expected end date would be, survey says 11/1, gold star, right? Or a grad student who's not going to be on short work break for the fall, but they're going to be returning in the spring. Again, we're probably going to use 1/1 as the expected end date so that we have January when we come back to decide, are we going to reappoint them, or, oh, they're not going to be working, we can go ahead and put in a term or extend that short work break a little bit further. Maybe they're going to work next year. SHRA students, we have the auto term process that runs on that, and they're terminated once they hit that expected end date, right? So that process runs really early in the morning before most of us are awake, or maybe when some of you are still awake from the night before, if you're one of those night owl people, right? It will not terminate anyone who has an active ePAR in progress. So if there's a job change in progress for that EMPL record, the auto term process is smart enough to say, oh, they might be updating this, I'm not sure, but I'm not going to terminate them. But tomorrow, when their expected end date also now is still in the past, if that ePAR is executed and there's no change, then they will get auto termed the next day, right? So it is smart enough to look and see if you're trying to fix it at the last minute and we're just waiting on approvals, it's not going to force the auto term. Obviously, you want to be looking at InfoPort, your expected end date report, or that job summary that we just mentioned that would show the expected end date, and make sure you want to start that process before that expected end date if you don't want them to get auto terms. Obviously, help tickets are the way to deal with auto terms if you didn't want that to happen. Please do not rehire someone back into the same position or the same job if they had an auto term, right? That clusters and messes up our reporting. It makes it look like we're hiring a whole bunch of people, that it's really the same person in the same job. But sad face there for.
In addition, some things happen with the I-9s too, if you actually do a termination.
Right, the same impact with I-9s too. If you put in a term and then put a rehire with the same date. EHRA students. So as of January of this year, we started a process that I think in general has been very happily received by campus, to auto term EHRA students as well when their expected end date is reached. Now that process is slightly different in that it runs just once a month on the 15th. And what it does is it terminates anyone with an expected end date that's in that month or earlier, because we want to make sure that those are in place before we run monthly payroll. That's why those terms go in that way. So if I've got an expected end date of October 18th, then on the 15th when that ran, it put in a termination effective the 18th to terminate that EHRA student. Again, it's not going to auto term people if they've got an ePAR in progress that might be saving them. And then, of course, because we're UNC, there's always an exception. So fellow trainees are exempted from that. Obviously, we talked a little bit about this, effective dates for terminations, right? Thinking about it not as the last day worked, but the day after their last day worked, right? The first day that they're no longer employed is the termination date. And important to know that you can't do any job actions on someone with an effective date past their expected end date, right? So using an example above, if we're paying a student through the end of the year, the termination date would be 1/1, so that we pay them the full monthly salary through the month of December, right? If their expected end date was erroneously put in as 12/31, and you allow that termination to go in 12/31, they're only going to get paid for 30 days of December. The way payroll works on a monthly rate, it calculates It's $500 for this month. There's 31 days. It calculates a daily rate, and then it pays them that number of days. So if you left the termination in 12/31, you're going to short them a day of pay. And if they're a student, they'll be sad about that, right? So if you had that scenario, you'd have to do a job change action first to change their expected end date 1 day before you could process that termination effective 1/1. All that makes sense? Lots of head nodding. Great. Some other scenarios, a student is inadvertently hired twice. Another thing, like Harvey said, never happens here, right? Into the same student job. What's the proper protocol? A help ticket, right? That's always should be your first response when you got a problem. The duplicate might be able to be backed out if it had written onto a EMPL record where there was something there before, and then you could fix that. If it wrote to a brand new EMPL record, then we can't back those out. You have to put in a termination, same effective day to write on top of that. If there's an overpayment, right, you're going to need to pass that to payroll to process that overpayment. If you only discovered that in November, oh, this is the same job, this person's been overpaid for it. So you'd need to process that through payroll. You find out an SHRA student in your department is going to continue to work over the summer, but they were auto-termed, right? If it's in the same job, we don't want to hire them back 6/1 if they're going to start July 1st. We can just back out that auto-term with a help ticket and start the expected end date change, right? And edit existing job ePAR to extend them. And as long as you've got that in progress before the end of day, then they're not going to get auto-termed again the next day, right? Because even if it's waiting on approvals, if it sees that that ePAR is out there, it's not going to auto-term them again the next day. All right, we got a couple of other just general topics that didn't merit like a broad label, but we use the wonderful label of additional information. We have 5 minutes, so we're going to blitzkrieg through as many of them as we can.
Well, I was going to say we may want to sort of tailor our presentation to topics. Let's just talk a little bit about retroactivity and retro pay. I think that's probably one of the key things we probably want to talk about. I know you put transactions in, and will payroll pick this up or not as a part of, I think it's a very important topic that we probably need to discuss. And so if you look at the second set of bullets, retro pay will pick up if it's the person was paid in the same, paid the previous period, and it was on the same EMPL record number, and it's the same pay frequency. Retro pay will pick up a transaction like that. But if the person wasn't paid, and we've got some examples, a new hire action executes after payroll lockout. Say M4 payroll lockout was 10/23. Payroll period covers obviously the whole month of October. The transaction was put in on the 24th with the pay effective date of 10/15. Then you're not going to get picked up in payroll because obviously you missed the lockout for that point of time. Now, we do get help desk tickets where they say, push that through. And we can, in some cases, get that transaction in. But in the normal course of process, that transaction wouldn't execute till after it came out of lockout and the person wouldn't get paid. But the question is, what happens in the November payroll? Does it actually pick up those days in October?
No.
It does not. You have to call the help desk to make sure we actually alert payroll that you need to look out for the couple weeks that was not actually included, that person wasn't paid in October. And so most of these are similar to that. A student on short work break returns after the payroll lockout. Similar situation, you put the transaction in on 7/24, return the person effective 7/15. Obviously, the person won't be paid in July, but the question is, will he be paid in the next month? He won't be. You actually have to, once again, because the person wasn't paid in the previous period, it won't pick up those times. You actually have to open a help desk ticket to make sure that takes place. Let me skip through some of these. All those are sort of repetitive. Sorry, I'm trying to find things that we can talk about in the time period. Midstacks. Let's talk a little bit about Midstacks. So they give us the old pancake example for Midstacks. Hire action, department change, supervisor change, pay rate change, TIM change, all those were put in ePARs in a very timely fashion. All of a sudden, You find out those leave of absence should go 11-1. Well, you've got this top of stack of the TIM change. Of course, it tries to go in there. It can't happen. You can submit the ePAR. You should submit the ePAR. And what will happen with you submit that ePAR, two things will happen. First of all, we're going to see it because somebody's on call the next day. So, well, why is this transaction? It's been approved, but it hasn't been executed. Why is it still there? And Alex or I or Ann or Corey will actually take that and try to work that transaction in. But you should also, raise a help desk ticket. If it's there more than 24 hours, you certainly want to contact the help desk and say, why hasn't it been picked up? But normally it will get stuck. That's what a Midstack is. All right. Any questions about Midstacks? Nope. I won't go through the scenarios. Primary and secondary jobs. We have a number of audits that we actually run that we look at every day to see if there are more than one primary on a job record, or if we've got multiple secondaries and no primary put in place. And we actually make some adjustments to that based on the rules, like permanent appointments always are a primary versus a temporary assignment. EHRA appointments have priority over SHRA appointments. Certainly over contingent workers. With no job end date, this is just sort of the order that we actually process those to decide which records should be primary. So if you see something that's out of order, certainly open a help desk ticket, and then we will actually look at that and actually make that adjustment for you. Oh, we're out of time. Okay, well, I think there was some help information, Alex, that you had at the end.
There is, unfortunately, we still have a lot of slides. I mean, we had a lot of good discussion, which I think is helpful. All of the slides will be available. There's some really helpful stuff, I think, especially not only for resources, but one of the topics I wanted to cover that's not covered at all is ePAR search. How to find those transactions that you worked on if you don't remember the number or you don't have the bid of the person or you want to find a range. There's some really helpful stuff on here that I was hoping